come along to our cabin in the wild, 'cause we're in for some good fishing, feeling easy, feeling free. Yes, we're in for some good fishing, Canada.
Today we are in pursuit of old bucketmouth. This elusive predator has a host of names: mossback, greenback, black bass, or in simple terms, largemouth bass, and is considered by many to be one of Canada's most popular game fish. They are inquisitive by nature, and with their voracious appetite, it is one of the most exciting catches available in North American waters. This predator is found primarily in the southern reaches of the province of Ontario and Quebec, but is also available in other parts of Canada on a more limited basis. A favorite hangout and feeding area is any back bay with standing cane or reeds. With lily pad growth and deep water access, places like this provide everything that bass need to flourish. Standing reeds in open water act as stopping and feeding points for bass moving in and out from deep to shallow. We'll also cover underwater structures such as submerged logs, combination structures such as wood-to-weed transition, and tell you what to look for in areas that may be holding spots for fish. To help us better understand old bucketmouth will be Pro Staff member Jack Williamson, seasoned bass fisherman and worm specialist; Reno Viola, Pro Staff fishing educator and co-host of the Fishing Canada show; Pete Bowman, weed line fishing expert and member of the Fishing Canada Pro Staff; and Cecil Ray, staff member and largemouth expert. Our educators today also include Angelo Viola, co-host of the Fishing Canada show, showing us the finer point on weed line fishing.
There! I got him! No way!
A good hydrographic map can be your best friend when trying to locate these freshwater fighters. Lakes that have shallow water back bays adjacent to deep water are the areas which should be fished first. Today we'll be breaking the lake into two different categories: shallow back bays with good adjoining flats and deep water weed lines at the mouth of a back bay. Today we'll be starting off fishing lily pads.
Problem with fishing pads, I thought I had one. Problem with fishing pads is that you're going to get hung up an awful lot. The fish are definitely there given the right conditions. There's several reasons why they'll be there. Number one is to feed, because the weeds attract the smaller bait fish, and in turn the bass go to the smaller fish, and also to seek shade. And on a day like this, they're probably in here because of the shade. It's very, very warm out, and the pads, because of being so wide at the top, cause a filtering effect through the water. Now, it looks like it's all covered in, but underneath it, because pads grow straight up and then spread out at the top, it's all fairly open, so it gives them lots of room to roam around. What you should do when you move into a bed like this is to work the outside edges first, which we did just a little while ago, so as not to disturb them before you move right in. You'll find that most of your aggressive fish will be on the outside edges and outside points. Little pockets and indentations in the edges of the bed are also good places to fish, because the aggressive fish are sitting on the edges waiting for bait fish to swim by.
One of the most effective ways to fish these weed-choked back bays is with spoons such as Johnson's Silver Minnows. Those with rubber skirts usually make better attractors and swim more erratically than non-dressed ones.
A couple of different ways that you can work a spoon in the pads. You can skim it right along the top at a fairly good clip and make it come back fairly rapidly, or probably the better way to do it would be to let it drop at all the openings, or larger openings. Now what that'll make it do, if there are any fish that are following it and they're hesitant to take it, they should take it on the drop, because it looks like a wounded minnow stopping for a little rest, or a wounded frog stopping for a little rest. Another real productive way to fish pads is with a topwater chugger. Now, there's a million different explanations for topwater chuggers, but it's a fat bait, usually with treble hooks, and you're going to have to make some modification on the treble hooks, but it's supposed to resemble a frog or a minnow along the top, just making little wee movements, or a mouse or something like that, you know? And what you do is you just cast it out, let it sit, let all the rings dissipate, and just move it back a couple inches at a time, just little short jerks. Then stop, let it rest for a minute as if it's resting. Then give it a couple little twitches on the way back. And it moves right in and out of those pads beautifully. Now, don't go doing this if the bait has a treble hook on it, because you're going to get hung up. You're going to have to make a couple of modifications. Here's what you're going to have to do on these things. You're going to have to cut off the front barb on the treble hook. Otherwise, as you're bringing it through, you're going to get hung up and you're going to get nothing but weeds. Now, by losing one hook on your treble hook, you're not going to lose that much hooking power, but it will make it move through this junk a lot better. You know, my favorite way, though, to fish pads is with plastic worms. It's fun, it's exciting, and when they take these things, you really inhale them so you get a good hook set. Now, there's two types of worms. Well, there's actually 4 or 5 different types of worms. There's two types of worms that I usually fish with. One is a curly tail variety, and the other is a flat tail variety. I generally go to the flat tail variety, the paddle tail variety, in the pads, because the curly tail one tends to get hung up around the grass and then it won't come through very well. So today, let's fish with this paddle tail. You're going to need a couple of different things to know first. You're going to have to know how to hook it. Texas rig is probably the most successful way to fish pads. There are a couple different ways, but if you learn this one and learn it well, it's probably the only one you're going to need. Take your hook, puncture the head of the worm, go down about 1/2 to 3/4 of an inch, and come on through. Push the worm along the hook up into the eye section, turn the hook over, and bury the hook part, or the point part, pardon me, on the belly of the worm. Now, the key to it is that you might have to play around a little bit, but the key to it is to get your worm as straight as possible, or in the straightest line as possible, to be more successful. Don't be in a hurry hooking up your worms. Now, you're also going to need a split shot, or a sinker, a sliding sinker on the head of it. And in this case, I'm going to recommend that you peg it, because by pegging, it won't slide up and down, it won't get hung up around these little pads. Now, most people do this. They take a worm and they cast out, and then they treat it like a lure, they bring it back real fast. And granted, sometimes that works, but the way to fish a worm is like this. You take it, get low to the water, cast, so that you don't make a big splash when it lands, and let it sit there for a minute. Feel your line, have it on your finger just in case something does take it at that point. Tighten it up, and sit and wait. And if you have to count to 10, 20, 30 sometimes before you move it, do it though, because it will work for you. Just hang in there and do it. Once your line is tight, keep your rod tip up and keep your finger on your line. That way you can detect any little motions. Like a largemouth bass can swallow and exhale, or pardon me, inhale and exhale anything in less than half a second. So sometimes it's pretty quick. Now, just lift your rod tip up, bring the worm up over the next couple of pads, and let them sink in, and do the same thing. Take the slack out of the line and hang on to it again. In other words, you would fish a plastic worm just like you would a real worm.
Lily pads offer comfort, ambush points, shade, and resting areas for largemouth bass, and can be productive all day long, providing that they have a good source of forage, are near deep water, and have lots of lead-in cover adjacent to them, and should always be fished front to back in a systematic way, avoiding making excessive noise on your approach.
Come on, baby. Good bass. Come on. Oh, look at the junk. Well, there's a nice fish.
Areas like this are available all over southern Ontario and Quebec. So grab yourself a handful of surface baits, make the modifications, and give them a try.
Tell you what, where there's one, there's more. I'm gonna let this little guy go and go back after his mom. Oh.
More bass fishing after this. Plastic worms. Without a doubt, the #1 bait for largemouth bass in North America. Worms are available in several different sizes and colors, and when fished Texas rigs are one of the simplest and most effective forms of fishing available to you. They can be fished shallow or deep, slow or fast, in clear or stained water, and have the ability to trick even the most finicky bass, providing they are fished with the right presentation, which in most cases is by jigging the worm slowly. Yes, as slow as you can, and then cut your speed down in half.
Clear water.
These black have good contrast, though. Right?
Yeah.
Sort of. Now, I know it's a lot of.
Especially with this overcast day when I start swimming across the surface or something of this sort. You know, they just look up and they see that silhouette, eh?
Seems to be a real variety of colored worms, but the dark shades seem to be very popular. May be it moccasin or black, or even like this. This is sort of like what? This is a different type, Jack. I just picked it up. I got it out of your bag there.
Both these are action worms. As you can see, this one has a tail.
Why the sparkle in this one, Jack? This one looks like a worm that's injected with sparkle. What's the reason for that?
Just for something else that the fish can relate to in dirty water, just for them to be able to pick it up a little clearer.
Right.
Because this one,
would that be better in dirty water or clear water?
Well, this could be actually a use in both, because it's a nice thin worm. The rule goes that in clear water, you use small, thin worms. Okay? Usually solid colors also.
Like in clear water, would you say something like a motor oil worm would be good? Like, you know,
Yes,
a real or a
definitely.
smoke worm
Yeah,
would be good?
definitely.
Maybe in the dingier water, like, say, a darker worm or something with a lot of metal flake?
Yeah,
Something that
well,
might...
this would probably be more apt to be used in water that's considered stained from 0 to 4 feet. You know, worms like this with sound chambers built right into the side of it.
Sound chambers, I haven't heard of that one.
That's sound chambers, but things that actually create. See, when this
I see.
passes, it has air bubbles all through it, and when you're pulling this through the water, it's creating.
Geez, that's a weird looking worm.
That's called a ringworm. And this is a wart worm. This is pretty unique too. They come in quite a variety of different sizes. You showing a whole load for me?
I don't believe it. Look at that thing.
I'll tell you, they work.
I almost be afraid to tie one of these on. I never used one of these type. Like I've used, see the type you're holding up there? This is a sort of like a productive worm. I like these type. I've had a lot of luck with these flat tails as opposed to the action tails. Maybe it's just me, but I seem to catch more fish on those than the other ones.
Well, these paddle tails, they're usually used more in dirty water than they are in clear water. In clear water situations, you use an action tail. I should be actually running this paddle tail, but I am trying to cover a little more water, a little further.
With these, you can sort of hop, eh? And those other ones, you can almost swim.
You're keeping contact with objects at all times. What I'm trying to do right now is we're trying to determine whether or not these fish are active or inactive. We don't really know they were active as of yesterday, but we've had this frontal movement pass through and they just could be shut off. So we're trying to determine a pattern. Are they going to chase our bait down, or do we have to present it right in their home? Once we determine that, then I'll sort of judge a little.
I know it's one thing with rubber worms or small grubs. One thing you can use with this, you can use a real subtle approach. Eh? You can sort of throw it out and just work it back real slow.
Yeah.
And do you have good depth control? You can work them along the bottom or work them along the edge of weeds.
These worms are super versatile. I mean, you can throw them over top of wood. You can throw them in the heaviest weed cover. You can pad fish with them. They can be fished on the surface if they're rigged properly. They can fish subsurface, or they can fish right on the bottom. You can do a variety of things. The only thing, once you have to do is, they're not a type of bait though that is used primarily to cover a lot of water real fast. You don't want to. If fish are very aggressive and they're in there chasing things.
So once you've located fish, a worm is a good way of getting them.
Yeah, for pinpoint areas like your spinnerbait would be more productive
for covering a lot of water. Yeah,
covering a lot of water. Once you have an area, like for example, if we notice that we casted this flat and you haven't picked up anything, and all of a sudden this tree's got a few fish, well, your spinnerbait might pluck a few fish up, but your worm would probably outproduce 5 to 1.
You know, it's an interesting thing I wanted to ask you about, Jack. Because a lot of times say one day you're catching a lot of bass in the shallows. When I say shallows, I say water between 1 and 5 feet. Okay, a cold front moves through and the fishing shuts down. Now, are those fish still in the shallows but just inactive, or have they left the shallows and moved to the drop-off?
Well, if those fish were relating to the flat itself, what would probably happen, Steve, is they'd be looking for the thickest cover possible they can find on that flat.
So they'll bury themselves
They'll
in?
bury themselves into the pockets. If there's any matted stuff, they'll bury themselves underneath the mats. They'll bury themselves underneath the pads, things of this nature. If there's any wood, they'll relate to the wood, but they won't be in a chasing base like they were prior days.
You know what's interesting about largemouth? I've been reading a lot of reports. In Texas, they've been putting radio transmitters in some of the big bass they're getting down there. And what they find with some of these real big largemouth is they're really territorial. They'll catch one of these big fish, put a transmitter in them, and they'll let him go and say, this area here.
Yeah.
And he'll stay there the whole summer, the whole year.
Yeah.
Like, he won't move that far. He'll spawn in that area. He'll live in that area. And I found that really amazing, because I thought maybe they'd run from one end of the lake to the other, but they seem to be really territorial, some of these big fish.
They're not a migrating fish.
The big ones they found. They said some of the small ones move around a lot.
Yeah.
But once they get to a certain size and they're a big mama, they actually take up residence, so they have a home.
Well, they're not quite like a walleye that do a lot of migrating. And they're not same as a smallmouth that are strictly territorial, stay on one piece of structure from year after year. It all depends, basically, I guess, on the forage available to them. Once the forage is gone from this particular area, those fish are going to move one way or the other. They're going to move unless they want to sit there and die of starvation. So they're going to move with the forage, but they will not move any great distance. I've been sort of doing a personal study of my own lake, and what I've done is
Plastic worms. You bet they work. Try a few different colors and a couple of different sizes and stick with them. And when all the right points are covered, here's the results. More bass fishing after this. One of the most ignored areas of bass fishing is the deep water weed line. These areas are a little harder to find, but when you do find them, they are probably loaded with bass. Look for them adjacent to shallow bay areas, and the combination can pay off with big dividends. They can be fished at any time of the day, and once found, can produce all day long.
What's that?
My drag was set to
Was
loose,
it?
yeah.
So that's a weed line fish, isn't it?
That's a typical weed liner right there.
About a pound and a half.
Yeah.
Now, when they get into these weed lines, Pete, do they generally school up a lot? Like, can you run into a whole
Yeah,
school
you get a bunch at one spot, and you can work 500 yards and not touch another fish. But,
You can get into a real gold mine, can't you?
I've got, if you get a little pocket of weeds or something like this, I've got maybe 5 or 6 fish on consecutive casts before.
Is that right?
You know, up to 2 pounds.
There's one.
See?
There's another one, yeah.
That's a better one. Oh, yeah. Oh, that's a nice fish.
There he comes.
Not bad.
Now, that's pretty well in the same spot that you got that
Yeah,
fish.
a little cold.
Yep. It's a little better fish.
Yeah.
Now, he just took that on the drop. I cast that worm in
Same
there.
with me.
Yeah. And just
You
as
know,
it was falling down, he...
The boat's drifting in. We
he
might have
picked it
blew
up.
that spot now.
They can be a lot of fun, though, these weed line fish.
Oh, absolutely. I think it's my favorite type of fishing.
Yeah.
For largemouth bass, and it's untouched by most people.
The thing I like about weed lines is that you can pretty well guarantee yourself fish on it under just about any weather condition, you know?
Yeah.
Flats and banks really depend on the cloud cover and the temperature and everything else. But I find weed lines, you can pretty well pick them up anytime.
Yeah.
All right. Is that a good one?
There's a lot of weeds in there.
Well, you are just loaded with weeds.
No, I thought he was big.
No, he's about the same size as the other one. Look at the weeds on this fish. You think he was in the weed line, maybe?
Yeah.
Look at that thing.
He was deep in there.
Look at that. That's a little better. Yeah, I think he was in some pretty tight cover there, Pete.
There, he's starting to fight now. Look at how deep I had him hooked.
Yeah, he really took that in, didn't he?
Yeah. Yep.
These fish usually really suck it down, don't they?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. And they tap really nice, too. It's the best hit you're going to get in bass fishing. A weed line, When your worm drops there, bang, he hits it. It's just
Yeah, you can definitely tell there's a fish on the other end. Can't
feels
you?
like somebody going like this to your line.
Just tap. Yeah.
It's like,
Yeah. You know, I guess that's where a good graphite rod really comes into its own here, isn't it?
you
Because
can't
of the
use fiber.
sensitivity. You use fiberglass on this type of fishing, and you're going to miss an awful lot of fish, I
Oh,
would think.
yeah. Half your fish you'll probably miss.
Yeah. There's
Yeah,
another
I just
bait.
had a little bite too.
Did you? There he is. Oh, he's getting in the weeds on me. I don't know whether that's a good sight. Oh, this fish is pulling drag at me.
Hey?
He's running on me.
That's not like any.
That could be a muskie. You know,
Yeah,
we
look
haven't,
at
I was
that
going to say, you getting what this?
Yeah.
I was going to say, you know, we haven't had a walleye yet today. I'll bet you that's what this is. Oh, there we go. Look at this thing running. That's got to be a muskie.
Is it a walleye or?
Muskie walleye or something. It's not a bass. Well, for sure it's not the big bass we've been pulling out. Where is this thing? Here he comes, Scoop.
Yeah.
That's a bass. Oh, look at the size of this thing.
Oh, geez. Let me get
Get
that.
the net. You got the net?
Oh, no, it's all tangled up. I'm gonna have to lift it for you. Oh, look at the weeds coming out too.
Get over here. You haven't got the net?
No, it's all tangled up.
Get him in, Pete.
Oh.
Yes, sir. Woo-hoo!
That's a pretty good
Now
one for a
that
weed
is-
line fish. Matter of fact, that's the biggest bass I've ever seen on a weed line.
Wow. We have had a ball on these weed lines.
Oh.
Man.
I'll
So
tell you.
next time you're out on your lake, make sure that you go out to those, either the points of the weed lines or even just outside of the flats in those back bays and do some worm fishing. I'll tell you what.
You'll have some fun.
You're gonna. I think you've got me converted to
I'll tell
fishing
you.
weed
I
lines.
know you're gonna have all my spots pegged now.
Well, I'm gonna put them away, baby.
Come along, do